what are we talking about today?
We're talking about my second favorite thing.
Second favorite?
Second favorite thing, because we know that the most wonderful time of the year is job hunting season.
Yes.
That is our Martha Stewart wreath. We are
Yes.
reinventing it for every season. However, today we're focusing in on how to start classes, how to be thinking about setting expectations in your class when you're teaching, because here at UNL, we're at the beginning of the semester. So
Yes.
This is literally what I'm doing right now. And when you carefully set your expectations at the beginning of the semester, it pays off dividends. It's like, it is like the best little, index fund that you can invest in pedagogically, because those dividends just keep coming, right? But it does take a lot of setup and it does take a lot of consideration. And so in today's episode of Not That Kind of Doctor, look at me segue, me being Nick Hughesby, Associate Professor of Elementary Literacy Education here at UNL.
And Guy Trainin, Professor of Education here at UNL.
So today, I thought we'd talk about what and how we set expectations when we're teaching so that instructors who are coming to college classrooms kind of new can think about how to make that happen, right? Because there's the content of the course, but then there's also the how do you teach it and what do you need to happen in that space in order for it to be taught? So I think it all starts day one.
It definitely does. Actually, it starts before day one. It starts in your syllabus.
Yes. And talk to me a little bit about how you use your syllabus, because I use mine a little bit differently, and I would love to know.
So I actually have an empty space in my syllabus for behavioral expectations and expectations in general. What I do is I say we're going to have a discussion in class, and then I bring to class an empty template of expectations. What does it mean to not meet expectations, meet expectation, and exceed expectations? And what I create is I create the categories. So for example, attendance and late policy. The use of AI has emerged recently, but the use of other resources as well. Participation, in small group and in a large group, the policy around late work and handing in work on time and all of that. So I have these categories, but I do not fill it out. I leave it empty, and then we use the first couple of meetings as we're discussing the content and how we're going to do things and creating a community. One of the ways that I use to create community is have discussions around what do you think is appropriate here for us as a community to decide about rules, and I'd let them also define some rules about how they want me to be responsive as an instructor. So I give them an opportunity. We are creating rules or really community guidelines for all of us, not just for you as students, you have to show up, but I have. If there's something that, and really my message to them is at that point, if there's something that you have experienced in college that with your instructors that you think was not helpful to you or you think was really disregarding in any way, this is your opportunity to tell me what that is and for me to at least know that this is something that causes a reaction. I've never had a group of students bring up anything unreasonable in there. Right?
Nice.
And so it's not like this is an opportunity to create unreasonable expectations. And I also have a role in that. So I can say this is unreasonable, right? I cannot respond to you I will not grade anything within an hour of submitting it, regardless of when it is. Just not going to happen. But let's have a discussion about what's appropriate. So we have it as a community discussion. Now, I do know that not everybody feels as comfortable talking about this. So what we do is we have a community discussion and we have a document. We actually have multiple documents. So I'll let different groups address things in different rubrics, and then they cross-reference. So there's this whole complex. Nice. So each group focuses on one of these domains, but then everybody else has an opportunity to comment on it. I collate it, which gives me a little bit more control
Right.
about what's reasonable and what's not. And you often we both talk about the fact that there's a honeymoon period at the beginning of the semester. And one of the
Love the honeymoon
problems,
period.
but one of the problems of the honeymoon period is that nothing is due yet, and everybody's still got an A. So, and everybody has shown up to all the classes for the most part, and nobody's been late. And so suddenly students often say, nobody can ever be late and nobody can ever miss even a single class. And I just look at them and I say, is this a reasonable way to meet expectations? Or do we need at least a little bit of room if you're not feeling well? Or if something happened in your life that you need a little bit of time? Or something happened to your car and you're a little bit late? Maybe maybe we need to think about it. So my problem is often actually saying we need to have realistic expectations of ourselves, because you don't want to be stuck with this later saying, well, I didn't know that was going to have an impact. Because once we establish it, so they do it in groups, they comment on each other group, I create a draft, and then I leave it for a week for everybody to be able to comment anonymously or with their name on it. So if there are serious concerns, I can take those into consideration and they've had time to think about it. Nice. And then it becomes the set of expectations. And what I love about doing it that way is when students invariably have a problem with something, I go back and say, we all agreed to this. You wrote this. I remember you actually highlighted this, and now it's a problem. So this is what we agreed on. This is what we're doing. And I think that's, we were going to talk about this a little bit later, but that's the holding everybody to it. Because once we agree to it, again, I love the idea of agreeing to it as a community. We are all beholden to it. And if you decide as a community that we need to change this, we can have a discussion. But until that happens, this is what we set up to do. And so that's really important. But that clarity is super important. It's the first thing I talk to every graduate student who's teaching for the first or even second or third time is that written document, however it's created, even if you created it and you're putting out there, more clarity, more detail saves you a world of trouble later. Because you can direct everybody to that document that is there. That are the rules.
Well, and there's a certain amount of buy-in, right?
Yes.
Because it's co-constructed,
yes.
It's co-shared, and I take a slightly different approach.
Yeah. So
where one of the books that I read this summer that really helped me rethink my syllabus was William Germano and Kit Nichols' Syllabus, the Remarkable Unremarkable document that changes everything. And one of the things that they talked about was, and I had never thought about the syllabus in this way, but the syllabus is aspirational document.
Yeah.
The syllabus as, this is who I want you to be, you being students by the end of this semester. And so I really spent a lot of time reorganizing and rethinking my syllabus around, by the time you leave my course, I want you to be able to teach reading and writing K-6 to 90% of the kids effectively, 90% of the time.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. And I organized around that idea of, this is who I want you to be, and really used my syllabus to kind of sell that notion of, this is who I'm going to support you in becoming. Here's the kind of behaviors that I think are going to be helpful in that, right? So one of the things that I've really been thinking about a lot is how busy our students are, and how time is we talk a lot about time as a finite thing, but it is.
Yeah.
Right? And given the Carnegie hour, it's a 1-to-2 ratio, 1 hour in class to 2 hours outside of class, and being very clear about, I have looked at every single reading that I have assigned. I have calculated it at 150 words per minute, because when you encounter new content information and here's my citation, you're slow. Yeah. Right? And so very carefully and methodically, like breaking down this is who I want you to be by the time we're done, and I'm going to help you get there, and here's how we're going to do it. What do you need to be doing in order to get there? And there's some things that are going to be very common for all of us, and there's some things that you're going to need to be working on individually, right? But the pathway that we're going to go on is very clear. And that's new for me. That's slightly different.
Yeah.
But also feels like it's a bit more of an alignment with like who I am and how I think.
And what I've learned from you to a great degree, but is always on my mind also, just not as you talked about exactly how much time. So I've never actually calculated how much time readings took. And you've taught me about this is how much it takes. It's not that hard once you think about it.
It's not that hard.
I've never thought about it. But really, that sends the signal to students. I know how long it's going to take. And I'm sending you a signal. This is on average what it's going to take. If you read a little bit slower, you will need to think about, okay, I need a little bit more time. But we are aware that this requires time out of class. And we are expecting it. And here's where it is. And this is what it's going to take.
And the other message that sends when we're talking about expectations is I am respecting your time.
Yeah.
I am not going to ask any more of you than I am allowed to based upon this understanding of what a credit hour is. When you enrolled, that's the understanding that you were coming to. I will not take up more time than is required. Therefore, because I'm being responsible with your time, I want you to be responsible with my time.
Yeah.
And that really helps with things like attendance and whatnot, because there's this investment and transparency around that. And it also ensures that when they're looking at the syllabus and they're going, oh my gosh, this is so much, this is so much, this is so much. And I'm like, check the graphs. Because literally I have, for every week, I have a graph. This is where your time's going to be this week. This is how many hours you need in class. This is how many hours you need reading. This is how many hours you're spending on homework. Because I've mapped that out.
Yeah.
Right? And so it creates some really precise expectations for when you're coming to class, what are we doing, et cetera, et cetera. And it really helps students, I think, who may not know how to student. You know, figure out how to get some of that done, which sounds weird because our students are in their junior year, but sometimes they've been able to coast, right?
Yes, in one way or another.
And so I feel like...
Or coast or hold on for dear life and somehow make it.
Right, and so trying to make those scaffolds in order to get to that end identity and practices that are in that identity really, really clear. And so that syllabus is just one way to do that, right? As I'm planning for the semester, I'm just trying to be thoughtful in terms of, am I asking too much? And am I being pragmatic in what I'm asking them to do, right? And kind of mapping that out. What weeks are going to be more intense? Which weeks are going to be less intense? Just trying to like think that stuff through, because that if I'm being clear about my expectations for the work that we're doing, students are more more able to rise to them.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about our colleague Justin, who was on our episode on AI.
Yes.
And we'll add that in.
Title card somewhere.
But he talked about the fact that especially when there are moments of a lot of anxiety, a lot of work, the work is not even across the semester. There are moments where there's a lot more that is new, and there are moments where we're doing a lot more review and maybe even a little bit of a breather. It depends on the semesters, around spring break or around fall break or around Thanksgiving. There are ebbs and flows for every semester. And so identifying that to students from the beginning and say, look, for example, in my class, the beginning of the semester is going to be a lot of new things that you haven't thought about. I mean, we teach, for example, phonics and other things that students did not need and they don't have the language for, and that's much harder. And then things even out. And so the unevenness if it happens in your class, and you try not to have too much of it, but you do know that some things are harder than others for your students. And if you teach the same class a few times, you start getting to understand where are students struggling the most. And by setting the expectations that this is going to feel hard, but you will make it to the other end.
Right.
We will get to that end goal. It helps them reduce the anxiety and be able to work through that time, knowing that there's a path through that we have charted. And we know this is hard. This is hard for everybody. Not
Learning
just
is
you.
hard.
Yes.
Right? Like, if you knew this already,
yes, then
you
we
wouldn't be in this
need
class.
Yes.
You wouldn't need this,
Yeah.
right? And I think that kind of ties into kind of our next piece, our next question that I would love to ask is first day name games, yes or no? What's your opinion?
Name games, first day, no, second day. I do it second day, yes.
Oh, I don't do them at all.
Oh,
Hot
I
take,
do.
I'm not a fan.
We do, I open class once a week, so I have a class twice a week. I open class once a week with an opening circle, and that's an opportunity to practice names in different ways. Not necessarily a game, but I use that opening circle to, so everybody, your turn is to speak, and then you say somebody else's name. So they have to recognize names, and that needs to grow.
So you've got like a frame.
Yes, you definitely have to have frame. Right. And we do some embodiment exercises, and so there's an embodied hello that we do, and that's an opportunity to do that. But it's just a way to teach them another way to connect, but also to model ways for them to work with our kids. And so that the one advantage we have in teacher education is everything we do is also modeling. I will always go back to it. So we have different strategies around that, and you can learn the name of everybody. I teach in the elementary education program, but I actually come from secondary, where you have rotating students. So that trick is a little bit harder, because if you've got the same group of 20 or two groups of 20 students throughout the day, you very quickly learn names, and they know them each other's. If you've got students flowing in and out, it's a little bit different. So.
And the frequency is important, right?
Yes.
Like how...
Absolutely.
But all of this is to say, knowing students' names are an essential part. And it's just an early bit that you can do. I don't do name games. I literally launch in day one.
Yeah.
Like
content.
We start talking about subject, predicate, object, like day one. And so and again, part of that is I'm fortunate enough to teach in a cohort. They already know each other. So if I'm thinking about the function of that activity, it's more for me than anything else. And I'm not going to waste a half hour, 45 minutes on something just for me. Instead, I have them wear name tags for about 4-ish weeks. And I explicitly tell them, like, this first 4 weeks, it's going to be really awkward, because I'm going to be like, Guy, what do you think? And I'm going to walk around the room and be like, naming people off. Yes. But that's also, when you're talking about the modeling, like, that's me learning who what their names are and how that's functioning. And then they, think they're going to be clever and change clothes and sit at different tables and in different combinations. But that's fine. That's just additional practice for me to get those things down. But it's, yes, for 4 weeks, I am awkward. And even after the 4 weeks, there's a chance that I'm going to slip up.
Yeah.
But after 4 weeks, I'm very clear with them about, like, if I don't know if I identify you by the wrong name, you tell me.
Yes.
Because that's an opportunity to get some feedback, and it's not on purpose. I've given myself 4 weeks. I'm going to slip up as the scaffolds are ripped from me, right?
Yeah.
I haven't slipped up in a very long time, but I have a slightly larger group this year. So we'll see how that goes. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine.
It is fine.
It's going to be fine.
So talk to me about the structure within the class, because expectations are in the syllabus and in formal rules, but there are expectations that are not part of that necessarily, but are still there. So how do you create community expectations for different?
So I rely, huge surprise, I rely a lot on routines.
Yes.
Like, we engage in routines, partially because, again, the modeling.
Yeah.
I think about instructional routines as kind of teacher Tupperware. These are things, lists of, Vygotsky has this notion of defossilization, right?
Yeah.
Like there are things that we do so naturally, but in order to be able to break them down to make them comprehensible to someone else, we have to defossilize them. And so when I'm thinking about my teaching, instructional routines are one of those ways. It's like a recipe that I can share and make communicable to students. So like we always start with kind of a kooky conventions piece because I need them to know certain things about grammar. So we always start with kind of a light, picking a line from children's literature based upon Jeff Powers' notion of patterns of power. We compare it, et cetera, et cetera. And then we move into kind of a lecture-y interactive learning piece. And then we briskly move through those things. There's some notion of, I provide guided notes because I want to take that executive functioning load down so that they can play with ideas and concepts. Then there's an application activity. And they have to be, again, as we're moving toward that kind of identity at the end, and identities are composed of practices, not statements, right? As we're moving through, okay, here's how these activities, here's how this knowledge is building up to that. And so I rely on a pretty, like my class is organized pretty similarly every single time we meet. And I shift up and change kind of what's happening inside of those routines. So it doesn't get necessarily boring, but students know what to expect. Students know what kind of learning and what's expected of them in those moments. And so that's one of the ways that I hope that I'm modeling for them, how these instructional routines that I'm also teaching them can work and be leveraged.
And so the two layers here are really that having instructional routines and an agreement about what they are makes it easy for you as an instructor to keep doing them, because now you can focus on content, as the agreement about how do we go about doing certain things is understood by everybody in the community, but also by us. So we don't have to spend time on reinventing the class every time we go into it and spending our time in totally the wrong way. And the second piece is it's easier for students because they know what to expect.
Right.
And they know what's coming, and they know when we do this kind of activity, what are the outcomes that are expected and what kind of directions do you need. And that's hard, especially early on. I see instructors sometimes midway after giving an assignment to students and they're working groups, suddenly they remember 3 more things that they need to say. That is it happens. And then you stop everything and you give more directions, and some people listen and some people don't. So you really want to establish these routines. I think about this as a layered cake. Like there are layers in what I do every time. And if you cut through it, you will see the same pattern almost every time. And if it isn't, I will let them know, today we will skip this because we're doing more of this. Right. But it is a layered cake every time, with the breaks being the frosting in the middle.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, going back to thinking about my role as an instructor, and you thinking about your role as an instructor, part of the goal is to make those learning experiences as accessible as possible and reduce that executive functioning load where you're like, what are we doing in this? The purpose is not the activity. The purpose is the content within the activity. And when you, again, 24 hours in the day, if you have to keep redesigning new activities every single week, like who has time for that? I don't.
Nobody does.
Right?
At the beginning of the semester, you might fool yourself to think that you can.
Right.
You can't.
No, you can't.
Telling you now.
You can't. So find those things that are durable.
Yeah.
Find those things that are, and by durable, I mean you can use them to address a wide variety of content. and you can elevate them, but if you need to, you can also scale them down. If that's not where students are, you can scale them down and meet them where they're at. And that allows, that structure really takes off the pressure of how is this activity working versus, okay, what am I trying to learn through this activity? And how does that relate to the end goal of where I need to be when I finish this class in December?
And one of the things that I think is very much a K-12 behavior, but I find it incredibly effective anywhere I go, whether it's creating a workshop or teaching a class in higher education, or teacher education for that matter, is if students know what they're expected to do when they walk into the class, then they're not sitting waiting on you as the instructor to launch into something and then they'll go. They know we go in and here are the 3 things we're going to do. And in my classroom, for example, there are materials that need to come out and they help. So if you are showing up and there's time still until the beginning of class, you help take the materials out and then you go to your journal and you start journaling. And so there's something happening immediately, and you're already engaged. So I'm not trying to get everybody engaged when the class starts.
Well, and that's the other nice thing about those kinds of routines is they do help set up students to understand what kinds of engagement are expected. Right? So so another thing that I'm playing with this year in class is partially as a model, partially as a reflection on my own teaching, equity sticks, which is literally this age-old classroom tool where you have everyone's name on a stick. And when you have a question, you pull a stick, they respond, you put it in the other. I think I bought really cheap plastic cups from Target. I got one that's thinking on deck, one that's brilliant shared, and I just move it on over. And part of that is coming from, one, there was a lot of bias in my previous question and answer thing in class. And then 2, some of the learning research around by allowing some of my students to background themselves because they would never volunteer, that actually, that they need some of that tension in order to
stay engaged.
To 1, stay engaged, and 2, that is for learning, right? That's an emphasis for learning, but it's also, and I think I was okay with this before all of this, but if they answer inaccurately or it's off, how to redirect that. And probably one of the nicest things that students ever said about my teaching was, we read about the scaffolds that you're using in this class. Like you're actually doing it. And I don't feel stupid. Like you don't make me feel stupid.
Yes, and that's really important when you're reacting to students.
Which is really important, right? Like I can see where you're going. Oh, that's your thinking. Let me tweak it a little bit here. I want to redirect you here. And so that's really helped with engagement. Like the notion that if you make a mistake, I'm not going to
embarrass you publicly or make you feel small.
That doesn't serve my purpose.
Yes.
That doesn't serve my purpose. So
and the other structure that I use, we talked about an activity structure and expectations. The other structure that I use is a knowledge structure. So I have the core concepts in the domain in a matrix that I throw almost every time on the board or on the PowerPoint or whatever we're using. And so it always anchors back to that format. It's always sitting somewhere in everybody's knowledge, whether it's in literacy, we've got the literacy rope or whatever we're using, but as a way to always tie it to that goal of where do I want you to be at the end, and reminding of this verbiage and basically going back to it in the beginning enough that everybody can sing that and feel that that is firm. And partially that's because I think it's critically important from a learning perspective, partially because as a learner, there were quite a few times in my life that nobody has created that anchor. And it literally took me months after the class was over to go, oh, that's what they were doing. There's no reason for that to be implicit. Make it explicit. Make it a core part of your instruction so everybody's there. It makes everything better. So there's a structure to content as well. And exposing that structure to students help, again, set expectations. Here's the language you need to use. Here are the concepts. There are the core concepts. But I'm giving them to you. There's not that sense of a hidden thing, hidden curriculum that I expect you to know without telling you what it is.
Right. Yeah. No, in that I'm not trying to trick you.
Yes.
Right? Like, I am expecting you to have read these things, to know about these things from these readings, and then I'm going to augment them in class, and I'm going to be very clear about that. But also thinking about, from a learning standpoint, and Anita Archer has been fairly influential in helping me think through some things with her explicit instruction kind of stuff. And one of the things that I find most helpful, and this is backed up by learning theory, is I call it repackaging. So at the end of the class period, I'll repackage for students. Like, this is what we did today.
Yes.
You did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. Here are the functions. This is how this leads us up. I would like to, note to Nick, fall 2025, have a visual that I can like leverage in my PowerPoint that does that a little bit more graphically and consistently across time without I'll probably still repackage at the end of every class, but that's been really helpful. Right? So I'll repackage in class, but I'll also send out kind of a mini digest or a weekly digest where I do somewhat of the same thing.
And that's a structure you use better than me, depending on the class. Is part of your structure, as I've learned, is an end of the week repackaging. This is what we did this week. Here's an anticipation for next week. I try to do that in class verbally, but there is a tremendous advantage to doing it after class when you can reflect and also potentially get some feedback from students and all of that, and then repackage and think forward. I think I'm less organized, and that's why it's hard for me. But that's just the way it is. So we've talked about this a few times. Nick is considerably more organized and structured than I am. But I still think that for the sake of students, this structure is important. So whether it is important to you personally or not, that does not matter. The important thing is, what does it do for students?
Well, and I think the important thing about any structure is, or system, regardless of what it is, it needs to be able to accommodate anomalies. It needs to be flexible. It needs to be able to withstand some duress, right? Because ultimately, something's going to go awry, right? Like, something's going to explode.
Yeah.
Something's going to happen. Something's not going to go quite right. Like, there's always something that's going to happen. And a good structure is going to allow you to respond to those things and to kind of rebuild.
Yes.
Solidify what that is. But like, there are certain things that you can do when stuff goes awry, right? So what do you do when your class goes awry?
Well, I think that there are different things that can go awry. So I talked a little bit about the fact that once a week I do an opening circle. An opening circle is a golden time because I take about 15 to 20 minutes. You try not to make it take over your class, because then nothing else happens. But that's an opportunity, especially when things are happening outside the class but impact the class. So, for example, after the Uvalde shooting in the school, that's something that impacts future teachers. They're thinking about this. And if they're not, I need them to think about this. And so that knowing that I have that space and time allowed me to bring it. It's a structure. So talking about my layer cake, it's a layer that already exists, but it is flexible with content. So I can put something else in there and make that the point of discussion. So we sat that morning, the conversation was a little bit longer and people needed some time to work through it, to process, to think about what they want to say. But it was a golden opportunity. So that's one way for me to do this. when it's external events and it's not part of something happened with content. But if something happens with content, I just either squish a layer or just move a layer to next week and replace it with, here's a better way to do this activity that did not go well. So we practiced it. I thought it was going one way. It didn't. Here it is again. And I actually also structure, a priori, I structure my semester with a few days when there's a little bit, there's room to review whatever topics we did, and I'm not sure it's fully there, and the feedback from assessment says, too many students don't understand this. So this is not just individually sending materials, but it's actually we need to revisit. So I structure that into the semester, which is painful because we always have such a full semester.
Right.
But I find, if I do that, it releases the tension of I'm going to run over and give a really bad example by not approaching something that didn't go well. What do you do?
So I've done a couple of different things. One of the things that I do around like content knowledge, if they're not getting something on that first day, I've really been thinking about learning objectives in bands and thinking about what I need students to do before we meet in class, and then what I want them to do after we have class. So I think a really good example would be what we're doing with phonemic awareness right now, where phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, that distinction's really hard for students. That's really hard when you're getting into the units of what's happening. So students have actually been engaged in readings about phonemic awareness for about a week now. And yesterday was the first day that we covered it in class. And then there's activities that are going to happen afterward that are going to keep pulling at that. So really thinking about, it's that notion of interleaving, right? Like we're not just blocking something in.
Yeah.
We're having chances to practice it across time, giving that opportunity to forget a little bit. And that forgetting is going to help you pull it out of that short-term memory and pull it into long-term memory. So that conceptual scaffolding has been helpful. I've also been doing a lot of, in every class, I kind of have a, 5 to 10-ish minute, so there's exams in my courses, which is a shift for a lot of our students.
Yeah.
They're not used to having exams, which is, interesting. And that freaks a lot of them out because it requires particular kinds of learning. And so being very clear about, I'm going to support you in this. Here's the tools that I've given you. So they'll have things like guided notes, again, that help them focus in on concepts as they're in lectures. But also here's things that we know as researchers work when you're trying to move things into long-term memory, because I want you to be able to do this after you leave my class, right? Like how do I support you in getting that stuff in that big old brain of yours? And so things like how to build a flashcard deck, right? Like there's studies around that and what makes a more effective flashcard deck and what doesn't. Things like how to rework your notes, what makes more sense, what doesn't. A big turning point in class was read first, then highlight. Yeah. And they're like, oh my gosh, I just highlight everything because I don't know what's important. I'm like, that's what I just said, right? And so things like that, where I've kind of proactively been talking about these are the kinds of learning behaviors that I want you to work on with me, have been really, really helpful in terms of keeping things. We'll see how the rest of the semester goes. I started this kind of last fall and it worked out pretty well. Yeah. Because I know that they have some strategies that I can point them back to in order to make that happen. So I leave myself kind of when things go awry, I leave myself breadcrumbs. I leave myself islands that I can go back to that help me. This doesn't seem to you don't seem to understand phonemic awareness right now. we've got 2 or 3 more instances where we're going to really focus on it. And I already know that because I've planned that out.
Yeah.
So I can look at that. If performance on a quiz or performance on an exam doesn't go particularly well, tell me about how you're studying. What are you doing to move that information from short-term to long-term? And I'm also being very clear about this is what you need to have memorized. This is what you need to apply.
Yeah.
And be able to do that. Use the quizzes, et cetera, as like supports for that. Also, I just try to be, huge surprise, I try to be funny, which is something I fail at quite often. Because
that's what makes it funny is that fail.
I have never felt so old. This year, there's something about this year that just makes me feel incredibly old. I don't know half of the people.
Yeah.
Half the singers my students are listening to.
Yes.
They'll mention titles of TV shows. And I'm like, is that the latest Colleen Hoover? And they're like, no. And they're like, Colleen Hoover was so 2 years ago? I don't know if she was or not. I'm just proud that I knew who Colleen Hoover was. Right? So there is that kind of bumbling. I've been leaning into that this year. But like trying to like, look, friends, I know it's week 2, but I'm noticing some things on our quiz.
Yes.
Here's some of the things that are tripping you up.
So I think that I want to pick up on 2 things you said. One is, as an instructor, you've got to find a way to get that learning feedback from students, whether it is through quizzes, through tests, through assignments, through whatever it is, to understand where they're at. And there are lots of ways to do that. I do a lot less tests and quizzes, but I do a lot more other kinds of feedbacks. As long as you have data about what's happening, you have a concrete way to know, oh, this is a piece I need to reinforce next time we talk about it. The thing I use is, after I get the data, is that structure I talked about. So, for example, the big ideas in reading, for example, right? And I can go back to them every time because we have this in the corner and we point to it, and it becomes more and more their responsibility and less mine. But it's an opportunity to reconnect to more ideas and kind of almost subversively adding a layer of knowledge to it, or just shoring it up one more time and not saying, you learned this at the beginning of the semester, I've already forgotten it. You definitely have forgotten it. No, we keep hitting it all semester long.
It goes
concepts.
It goes throughout the entire semester. Like, you were going to continue to draw on this throughout the entire semester, and so that's part of what led me to last summer. That, like, how do I actually get that to happen?
Yes. You've got to be intentional about it. It's not going to happen by magic.
No. And it takes a lot of planning. Like, this is my second cycle of like trying to be as planful as possible, and it's a lot of work.
It is work.
It's a lot of work.
Start building it. If you're teaching for the first few times, just try to identify. And again, and I always go back to this, if you have somebody else teaching that, talk to them. Even if they're just as inexperienced as you are, just that conversation and clarification would help. If you have a mentor in your teaching, I'm mentoring a few graduate students right now, it's a golden opportunity to ask questions, to inquire, to try things and talk about them and find your path through it without making it too much work. I mean, you're hearing, both of us have been teaching what we've been teaching for a long time.
20 years.
And that means we've taught it many, many times, and we're still working on it. So you don't have to have it all figured out and perfect in your first semester or second.
We're kind of like America, moving towards a more perfect union, right? It's like, it's not that we are, it's that we're working toward it. We're in a constant state of becoming. Whoa, that was weird. But yeah, like there's, so we've talked a lot about what happens if our students don't understand things conceptually, or when it comes to behaviors, that's a little bit different. And that might require some difficult conversations.
Yes.
Which, episode forthcoming.
Yes.
Where you have to, really address, once you've established a pattern, you have to address what's happening there. And
Yeah.
so that's a kind of a bigger topic on its own. So we're going to dedicate, a separate podcast to that. So that should be the one that comes out after.
All right.
Yes.
And I'm going to run to the store and get some equity sticks and cups.
I mean,
I like it.
It feels, I had never heard them phrased as equity sticks before. And so as I'm reading through some of the literature this summer, I was like, oh, yeah, I see what okay.
And again, the advantage, they feel school-ish, but the advantage there is they are, again, reducing the cognitive load for you as an instructor. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
You're just doing it, and you don't have to think, did I call on this person? Did I not? Is there somebody I'm missing? No.
I'm just literally moving.
Yeah.
The problem I'm having right now is I don't always remember where I leave the cups. And so I need to figure that out. Or sometimes I forget the cups in my office and I have to run back up and grab them. So part of that's a materials management thing.
Yeah.
But it's new. I'm giving myself some grace.
Yes. Or maybe you should get a tool belt, but that's a story for another time.
I contemplated bringing out my teaching apron. And it might happen.
All right, then.
So
And we will share a photo of that.
I wonder if there is a photo. I'm still wondering if I have my teaching apron.
We can always get you a new one.
Not one with a snowman angel on it.
Well,
That's literally what it was. It was good times. That's what happens when you teach elementary in the mid-2000s. So, we've been talking about establishing expectations.
and it's more than the syllabus.
It's more than the syllabus, and it's more than... It's nice to start on day one, but you can kind of work those at any given time. If you find that there's things that you want to shift, you want to change, if things go awry, hopefully we're giving you some strategies to do that right.
All right, and we'll see you next time.